G'day everyone, my name is Asian Dad and today we're going to look into one of my very favorite laptop series. It's a Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Carbon. It's a 14-inch ultra lightweight business class laptop, yet it is thin, light, and it's still very functional. It's the reason why I've loved it for many years. Now this is the 2021 model, so this is the Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Carbon Gen 9. Now they've made a lot of changes in this Gen 9 compared to the last year version, which is the Gen 8, and we're going to go through the functionality as well as the temperatures and fan noise and look at the internals as well. And of course I will be putting timestamps along this video so you can skip to the different sections that you may be interested in. So without further ado, let's get on with it. First off, let's start off what this computer can be configured with. Now with the processor wise, it is now being upgraded to the 11th gen Intel Core, and it is either an i5 or you can get an i7. So they're both 4 cores. Now as for RAM wise, this is an improvement, so they can go up to maximum capacity of 32 gigs, and this is soldered to the system board, so you need to make sure you get the correct amount of RAM when you purchase this computer because you can't upgrade it later. So the previous model was 16 gig, now it's 32 gigs. Fantastic, we can actually do more statistical work and also more content creation. So definitely Lenovo's been thinking about us after hearing what we've been asking for, so that's great to hear. As for storage wise, it's got one slot of M.2 NVMe SSD, and as for the graphics, it's still using the integrated Intel graphics, which is the Intel Iris Xe, which does pretty well, which I've been testing for the last year or so. As for the display wise, normally I'd say full HD, but this has been upgraded to an aspect ratio of 16:10 since Gen 8, and now I have to say it is a widescreen ultra enhanced display. So there's a couple options for this one here. There is a touch version and a non-touch version, and they've got a bit of matte feel to the display, and they are rated at 400 nits of brightness. There's also a privacy guard version, and that one is rated to 500 nits of brightness. Now that has touch as well. There's also a 4K option, which is a non-touch version, and it has a glossy type of look to it, and that is rated at 500 nits of brightness. Measuring the color gamut coverage multi-touch display, it resulted with 98.9% sRGB coverage, 71.3% Adobe RGB coverage, and 73.9% DCI-P3 coverage. I welcome the new aspect ratio of 16:10. In fact, I was looking forward to it. You just get a little bit more screen real estate, and it's especially really nice to have the extra display for the Windows taskbar at the bottom if you're using Windows, and generally it does help for your office productivity work. Now as for the bezel wire, it is quite narrow on the side and decently narrow on the top and bottom, and this one I've got here is the multi-touch with the 400 nits of brightness, and I did not have any issue when I was out and about in the broad daylight, and you can quite happily still do your presentation if you're at the coffee shop outdoors, and it's still a great display. Now it does still have Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2, and it still is a 720p webcam. I do wish that Lenovo gave us an option for the 1080p webcam in next iteration, would be fantastic. And it still has that privacy shutter on the top, and it's just a nice little flick of a switch, and you'll see a physical shutter go over the lens, and you'll see it go red as well, just to signify there's a physical shutter over it, so even if it turns on, at least there's something blocking the view of the webcam, which is great, so you don't need the electrical tape or wet blue tape anymore. This is a recording from the 720p webcam from the X1 Carbon Gen 9. This is the video and audio unedited, so you can hear and see what it's like. Now I've got 2 types of lights currently turned on as always, and I've got one of my studio lights turned on, and also the 4 down lights in this room turned on as well. So I'm going to turn off my one studio light off, and you'll see this adjust. Now I've got 2 downlights in front of me and 2 downlights behind me. Now 2 downlights in front of me, it's quite far away, so there's not much light hitting on my face, so it's a bit dark, what I would consider a night sort of situation for this webcam. Now if you're in an office environment, you should actually get a little bit more light than what I am in at the moment. So I'm going to put on my studio light back on again, and of course with better light should hopefully get you better quality picture. Now I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this webcam. Let's have a look at ports. Starting on the right hand side of the computer, we've got the security lock slot, and then a USB type A port, which is USB 3.2 Gen 1, and it supports always on. And then we've got the headphone jack. Looking on the left hand side of the computer, we've got two Thunderbolt 4 ports. They are type C ports, and they both support power delivery. You can charge the computer using any of these two ports, as well as connect docking stations to any of these two ports as well. And then we've got a USB type A port, which is USB 3.2 Gen 1. And then we've got the full size HDMI port, which is version 2.0. There are 4 speakers on the X1 Carbon. There are 2 located on the bottom front side of the computer, and there is also 2 located on each side of the keyboard as well. Now, when I tested out the maximum volume of the speakers, it managed to measure in at a peak of 86 decibels. So that's pretty decently loud. It's louder than an iPad Pro, just for reference. So you won't be struggling when you're outdoors and doing a presentation. As for sound quality speakers, I like these speakers since they upgraded in Gen 7. And these are practically the same. These have great clarity between the highs, mids, and lows. Has quite a bit of bass as well. And it's fairly well balanced of the different ranges, and it doesn't distort at all. They actually sound really decent, and it has good acoustics as well. So these speakers are great for a business class laptop. The X1 Carbon comes with a 65 watt power adapter, and it's relatively small. It's just a little bit larger than my palm size, and it charges the computer via the USB-C port. The battery that comes with the X1 Carbon Gen 9 is a 57 watt hour battery. It's a 4-cell battery, and it does support rapid charge, which means you can charge the battery from 0 to 80% in 1 hour's time. I did perform a battery life test on this particular unit. Now this one's configured with an i7, and I tested my 5 different modes. So in best performance mode, it managed to get 2 hours. And in better performance, it managed to get 2 hours and 10 minutes. And in better battery life mode, it managed to get 4 hours and 45 minutes. And in battery saving mode, it managed to get 10 hours and 10 minutes. And in my media mode, it managed to get 9 hours and 40 minutes. So they definitely have improved on the battery life in this new Gen 9. As a disclaimer, I do put a very consistent workload across all the system resources in my battery life test. So you should get a little bit better numbers than I would, because most of the time with your applications, it wouldn't hit the system resources as hard as I would in my battery life test. I'm just trying to give you the worst case scenario. The weight of the Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Carbon Gen 9 is 1.16 kilos. Add in the 65 watt power adapter, becomes a total weight of 1.49 kilos. As for the temperatures and fan noise of the X1 Carbon Gen 9, when I put this computer on load, I found most of the heat was concentrated near the top center of the keyboard, specifically where the U and F9 key is. And that's unsurprising, because that's where the processor lays underneath, and also where the new exhaust has been relocated. And when I took my measurements, my ambient temperature was 21 degrees Celsius and 37 decibels for my room noise. So I took my base measurement when the computer was on idle, and the hottest area of the keyboard measured in at 27 degrees Celsius. And as for the fan noise, it was still at 37 decibels, so still practically quiet. Then I put the computer on 20% load, so that's pretty much average use. So that's tasks like office productivity work, streaming videos, surfing the web, and the hottest area of the keyboard measured in at 34 degrees Celsius. And as for the fan noise, it went up to 39 decibels. And then I put the computer on 50% load, and the hottest area of the keyboard measured in at 38 degrees Celsius. And as for the fan noise, went all the way up to 39 decibels still. Then I put the computer on 100% load, and the hottest area of the keyboard measured in at 46 degrees Celsius. And as for the fan noise, it hit a maximum of 41 decibels. I also measured the bottom back cover, and the hottest area of the bottom back cover measured in at 40.5 degrees Celsius. And of course the fan noise was still 41 degrees Celsius. The overall temperatures on the Gen 9 has definitely improved since Gen 8. And I think it's thanks to the new Intel 11th Gen processor, which runs a little bit more cooler than the 10th Gen processor. As for the fan noise, it is a little bit more quieter than the Gen 8. And you don't really hear too much of a whine when it spins up to 41 decibels. Looking at the stability performance of the processor, now this particular unit is configured with an i7-1185G7. Now looking on the Intel website, it has a base clock speed of 3 GHz when it's at 28 watts TDP, and it can go all the way down to 1.2 GHz at 12 watts if it needs to save power or it's running really hot. Now I have been running this computer on 100% load for the last 2.5 hours, so that's the processor, RAM and hard drive on quite a lot of load, and I've got the computer connected to mains power, and we have the best performance as the power scheme as well. Now I can see that the speed of the processor is fluctuating anywhere between 2.4 GHz to about 2.7 GHz. And we've got an internal core temperature of averaging around about 75 degrees Celsius. Now I've also noticed that once about 15 to about 20 minutes, the speed of the processor can quickly go up to around about 3.7 gigahertz, and it will sit at 3.7 gigahertz for about 1 minute, and the core temperature will hit around about 94 degrees Celsius. Now it only lasts that for about a minute, and after that it will ramp itself back down to around about what you see right now here at about 74 degrees Celsius, and you'll see the stability performance. So my stability performance will say it's anywhere between 2.4 to about 2.7 gigahertz. Let's have a look at the behavior of the processor to see how long this i7 is able to maintain a high turbo boost for. So this i7-1185G7 has a maximum turbo boost of 4.8 gigahertz. Now I've got this computer still connected to mains power, and it's set to best performance, and I'm going to start this computer to put on maximum load for the processor, RAM and hard drive, and I'll start this clock watch as well, and we'll have a look at the speed of the processor here. So it's going up to about 4.2 gigahertz, and it is still able to maintain the 4 gigahertz, and now we've pretty much just dropped down to about 3.6 gigahertz, and it's trying to recover some of this now back at about 3.8 gigahertz. And you can see the temperatures are climbing quite high very quickly here, and we're now down to about 3.5 gigahertz. And from our testing before, we do know that 3.5 gigahertz is where it likes to sit at for these high temperatures. Just passing the 1 minute mark, and we're down to about 3.3 gigahertz, and it's just jumping between everything there. Passing the 2 minute mark, and we're pretty much around about 3.3 to about 3.5 gigahertz, and we know from straight up from the stability tests, it pretty much likes to hover about that, and then after a bit of time it will then drop down to about 2.4 gigahertz. Now for those that's curious about the single core performance, so I'm just going to start this off and let's have a look at the speed of the processor. So we've hit in around about 4.3 gigahertz, and we're just straight away going down to about 3.5 gigahertz for single core, and I think it's going to pretty much sit around about that sort of speed for single core. Yep, it's around about 3.3 gigahertz. Now just finishing off the single core task, and I can tell you that it seems to be averaging around about 2.9 gigahertz for the single core performance, and we are below the base clock speed for the single core under the what Intel says. So we do have a bit of throttling, but it is coming down for the temperatures, so it's not going below the 12 watts TDP, which is 1.2 gigahertz. So it's still able high, but it is below that 28 watts at the moment, so still does pretty well. I did perform the benchmarks of this particular unit. Now this one is configured with an i7-1185G7 with 16 gigs of RAM and 512 SSD. So I'll put up the scores for Pass Mark, Citybench R23, PC Mark, 3D Mark, Crystal Disk Mark, MATLAB 2020B, Geekbench 5, Pugin Premiere Pro, Pugin After Effects, and SpecView Pref. As for the keyboard, it still houses the classic ThinkPad keyboard, which I love. And that's because it's got great key travel and each individual key is still relatively smooth. You got a nice large sort of style for each individual key, and it's got nice spacing as well between each key. And overall, it's just got a good feel when you're typing away. And I think you'll find a lot of people who are programmers love this keyboard, and it's also relatively quiet when you actually, and it's got, of course, good tactile feel bounce for each key. Now the power button is located on the top right of the computer, just above the keyboard, and it has the integrated fingerprint scanner as well. And of course, with the ThinkPad keyboards, it's still got that funky location for the function key, which is on the bottom left hand corner, and the control key is the second one in. Now you can change that in BIOS and also in the keyboard application. You can swap that around if that annoys you, and I've created a video to actually show you how to do that, and I'll link that in the description below. Now in the middle is still that classic track point, or the keyboard nipple, or the G spot is what I call it, just because of where it's located for those who still use it. And of course, it's still got those free mouse buttons below the spacebar to support the track point. As for the trackpad, it's got a decent sized trackpad for a 14-inch laptop. Now, as for the texture of the trackpad, it is quite smooth. It's actually smoother than before. It's not a glass feel to it yet, but still way smoother than the previous generation, and it does support multi-gesture, and it is very responsive. And I've tried it with moist fingers and even with disposable glove, and they register no problems at all. Now it is mechanical, so you can depress it on the bottom here, and it is hinged at the top. Now as for the palm rest, the texture has been changed a little bit before. I think it's better. It's a lot more fingerprint resistant than before, as you saw in my unboxing video, and it's a little bit more rougher, but not crazy much rougher than before. So I think over time this will smooth out, but definitely it doesn't annoy me at all. I think this is actually a better material than before as well too. Now as for the build construction of this computer here, this is a magnesium alloy as well, and it doesn't flex that much when you're pretty much trying to twist it. And as for the keyboard flex, it doesn't flex too much at all. I think this is done a very good. These are very durable computers, these X1 Carbons. And I've got to say, with the hinge as well, it is very smooth to even open up, as you can see. And as you're trying to move this around, as you see, it still clamps pretty well for the hinge. So these are really nice build quality for the X1 Carbon Gen 9. I definitely think they've improved, especially with the material they use. It doesn't grab fingerprints as much as before. So definitely a good welcome to the new Gen 9. Let's have a quick look at the internals of the X1 Carbon Gen 9. So I've got the 54 watt hour battery here. It's interesting they've actually left a bit of a hole here, but that's something new to me. And it is held in by 6 screws. I've just undone them to speed things up. And for those who are interested in what's underneath the batteries, there's not much there besides this CMOS battery. So it is connected up to this little connector here. Now you don't need to actually remove the main battery to get to the CMOS battery to disconnect it. So you can just pretty much just disconnect it here with this main battery connected still. And above the battery is the signal slot of M.2. Now it is held in by a screw, and it's nice to see they've actually got a copper heatsink or the SSD. Now on the right hand side of here is where the memory sits underneath here, and of course it's got a new thermal solution for the twin fan for the system fan. Very interesting. Now on the left here is the slot for the WAN card or the LTE. Now I don't have that configured in this particular unit, but that's where it would normally sit. And above there is the Bluetooth or Wi-Fi 6 as well. Overall, with the Lenovo X1 Carbon Gen 9, I think Lenovo done a fantastic job on revamping one of my favorite laptops. And it's even worthy of an upgrade for those who own the Gen 7 or Gen 8 of X1 Carbon, just because you get the better display, better temperatures and fan noise, and of course better performance as well too, and better battery life. So overall, this laptop is definitely worthy of an upgrade for those with the older generation. And for anyone new to X1 Carbon, you'll love the weight of this computer, and now it's got better build quality as well. So definitely, I can easily recommend the X1 Carbon Gen 9. Now, if you find this video informative or enjoyed it, or even to support my channel, smack that like button for me. It does help me out. And if you haven't done already, subscribe to my channel by hitting the subscribe button on the screen. I do try to upload a new video every week. And just remember, imperfections in life makes it beautiful and interesting. And I'll see you next video.